So for all of us who are here in town, for all of those online, I want to welcome you. And we are engaging in a series this latter part of the fall entitled Spiritual Practices, Developing Life with God. And we do that in such a way as to realize that what we call spiritual practices or spiritual disciplines or similar ideas are not really about rules. We tend to think only in terms of rules, like these are things I need to do, like religious obligations. But if we're to really understand the heart of spiritual practices, we're really following in the heart of Jesus to have connection with God. It really isn't about rules, it's about relationship. Now, those commands or those rules may be ways to help us understand how appropriate, and God calls us to those things. But what we need to realize in our hearts is that with every duty that we have, the flip side of that duty is desire. Meaning, if we understand that the duties that God gives us, the things He calls us to, on the flip side of them really is the very thing that we most ultimately should and hopefully will learn to desire because they truly serve us. And that's true with all these kind of spiritual practices. And how fitting today that we should gather around the spiritual practice of gratitude. Of gratitude. It is actually a part of the practices that we're called to, that kind of connection that someone says to us, if you want to be in relationship, let's get excited about living in gratitude. That's what Jesus would call us to. And gratitude really, in many ways, is one of the very first things that we're told in life, one of the first things that we're told to do, right? When you're a young child, you're told whenever you're speaking to somebody, say please and thank you. And there at that moment, we are told something about gratitude. And it's not all good. Because we're told that when we think of that, you're told you have to say thank you. Did you say thank you? Did you say thank you? It's almost like we're being attacked, right? And it's like we're learning an obligation. You're obliged to say it. You owe it to somebody to say it. How dare you not say thank you? And I'm afraid that as we rise up as children and go forward in life, our natural sense is that gratitude is merely an obligation, merely something we owe. And so the idea in our mind about gratitude can be something that it doesn't matter what you feel, only what you say. And that's not true. We need to learn to really actually have gratitude, not just say thank you. Although saying thank you can help that, we need to find it in our hearts. It's also the idea that we think then that God needs our thanks. Like God is really insecure and He really is feeling he's feeling underappreciated. Do you know that God doesn't need your thanks? He doesn't. You and I need our gratitude. It's our connection to God, and that's what we need to begin to grasp more and more. And so many of us might think, I want to be a grateful person. Most of us would say, I'd like to be a more grateful person. And some of us might find it particularly hard. We feel like, well, there's those people who the glass is half full. For me, it's always half empty. I don't know how to sometimes be in touch with and appreciate. I always feel deprived. And for some of us, that can be a real challenge. And being told to say thank you isn't really helping that along, right? It can be like being told to be spontaneous, right? If you respond to that, you're not spontaneous. So it feels like it's kind of a catch. If I just merely say thank you when I have no gratitude, I don't feel like I'm really learning anything. The truth is that every one of us can begin to live into the practice of being grateful, because what we find is that it's not really rooted so much in first having the feeling and then expressing it. But what's been discovered is how much when we express gratitude, when we learn to do that, it actually begins to open up our hearts to joy. The two play off each other, the expression of it and the very feeling and experience of joy, of gratefulness. In fact, the thing that's been most surprising is that those who have set out to study how people experience gratefulness or express such a thing have found that it's been shocking to discover that it's actually not those who have the most joy who are expressing gratefulness the most, but those who express gratefulness who then find the most joy. It tends to be actually in that order. And so we read in the Psalms, among many places where we're told to practice this. We read in Psalm 95 where it says, let us come into his presence with thanksgiving. Come with thanksgiving. Let us make a joyful noise to him with songs of praise. That we're told to come with thanksgiving, as we just said. There is so much we can discover, and we're going to note that in a little bit. So much to discover. We were just singing that God's goodness is chasing us. There is a goodness in life that has been after us, that it's been there from the beginning. And it's finding and getting in touch with that. And there, joy will flow from it. So it's not joy that makes us grateful, but gratefulness that brings joy. I had a grandmother who was one of those who had the least of anybody in our whole family system. She would spend her mornings cutting coupons and doing it joyfully. She would just be one of these, we just would laugh at. She went and had a colonoscopy, and she said it was the best one I ever had. That was her. I'm not exaggerating. There was a house under construction. It was just all gutted, and she came by, and we wheeled her through, and she said, oh, I just love it. I'm like, no, this was like, it's all just under construction. Oh, but it's the best under construction. She was just like that. She was one who had more contentment than anyone. And I looked at her life, and I could see the truth of this. And the question for some of us then is, how can we practice this better? What can help us to form that kind of gratitude in us? Well, we're going to have an opportunity in just a bit. So I'm going to be brief about to actually stand where we are and share this morning. This is one of our traditions that we have done. So I'm going to invite you to be pondering what you may be grateful for this year, particularly. And it might be something that took place this year, or it might be something that you just have realized and come into a deeper appreciation of, a renewed appreciation of this year. But before we do that, let me just briefly share a little bit of what can help us practice gratitude. The first thing is this: to stop focusing on what we don't have. The truth is, that will consume our lives. You know the feeling of the grass is always what? Greener. We think that we almost live in a world that trains us to always, as soon as we have grass, we're sure that the other people around us, their grass is better. It's greener. Somebody once said that if the grass is always greener, it's probably artificial turf. And it's probably true. There's something very deceptive about what we tend to see. And that deceptiveness is something that God speaks to, because he knows that we will be enslaved by that kind of deprivation thinking, that kind of always looking and wanting what someone has. Do you know when the great commandments, the great 10 commandments, most of us rarely speak of the last of those 10 commandments. Do not covet what your neighbor has. Right at the core, God is calling out a people from being enslaved in Egypt, but really it was about being enslaved to the ways of this world. He says, I've called you out to be a people who live liberated from the things of this world, to be my people who live outside of and understand goodness. So really the 10 commandments are really 10 ways to live as a liberated people. And the last of those is to live as those who do not covet, who aren't enslaved to this endless desire to always have what someone else has, because you will never enjoy what you have. And this is one of the things God speaks to. And coveting is really that going after what your neighbor has, wanting it, having kind of an evil desire towards others. But at the heart of it is the desire itself, and that's envy. And the Bible speaks a lot about envy, but really God is constantly speaking of it. And we find it not only from far past, but all the way through the things Jesus said and the things that we have in the writings of the New Testament, constantly speaking about envy. We read in Proverbs where it says, a heart at peace gives what? Life to the body. To be at peace, to enjoy, to be content with where you are and what's at hand right now. But envy rots the bones. There's this thing called envy that's at work and can be in all of us when we're always focused on what we don't have. And James later on in the scriptures writes, for where you have envy and selfish ambition, there you find disorder and every evil practice. He's saying this element in us that consumes our hearts with what we don't have and always wanting more will never be at peace, and it will ultimately lead to all sorts of things that are ultimately destructive for us. And I think this is so timely for you and I to think about and stop and pause into as we go into a holiday season. Because we all know, and we all face this every year, that so much is going to come at us from now, and it probably started like 2 weeks ago, but particularly this weekend, all the way through the end of the year. And it will be messages telling us what? You really need this. And you'll really be satisfied if you have this. And you really, your model's the old model, You really need the new model. Oh, I do? Yes, you need the new model, or you'll never be happy. Those are the messages that were going to come at us, and they come so constantly. What are they telling us? To be focused on what we don't have. We will never, ever be happy. You understand what they're training? They're training you to what? Never be happy. That is really so much of what will come towards us. What if this holiday season, we shifted the focus and we said, through the holidays, I'm not going to really think too much about what I want or need. There are legitimate needs in life by far, and I never would want to downplay legitimate needs that we should have. But most of us know that there's very few essential needs in life, and most of them, for most of us, have been met. Most of us, of what we're talking about is things we might want, things we think or connect with our happiness. What if we shifted this season and determined, you know what I'm going to do this season? I'm going to focus on what I have. I'm going to make this a season where I actually get more happy by what I actually already have. And I'm going to give that thought all the time. Whenever there's advertising, I'm going to shift to think about, wow, what do I already have that could be so amazing? And as we do that, it leads then to the second element that helps us to practice, and that is this, to start being amazed at life. Amazed at life, not just kind of like, yeah, it's okay. There are things that should amaze us, like we were just singing about. Get goodness in this life, that most of which we take entirely for granted and just assume that there's really nothing there. We're just looking at the little stuff. But there is so much to be amazed about. If I would just stop and focus on what I have right now, what I woke up to, I could begin to make a list of hundreds of things. But of course, most of the time I'm just focused on something I need to get done. Aren't you? It's like every day you're just focused on, I need to get through this day. I'm not generally taking time to stop and be amazed. But if we do, I woke up and I took a breath. I was sleeping next to the most beautiful, amazing woman that I deeply love. My dog was there too. Man, he's awesome. And then I could just keep going through the day, and it's beautiful. I mean, I think how many people on Thanksgiving were like outside going, oh, it's too hot. It's like, it's beautiful here. It's like the most amazing day. How about that I felt there was enough sunshine? How about I live on one of the only planet that we're aware of that actually provides life for us? How about we just keep going through a list? I start to realize that I am surrounded by so many amazing things, that I'm surrounded and connected to people, every one of whom is an amazing person. Even the people that we may have difficulty with, if we look a little deeper, what? They're amazing. They're amazing. And if we start looking at so many elements of life, they are. But we have to see that they're already there today. We're so focused on getting ahead, but if we stop and go, what about today? And this is what we read in the heart of the psalmist, who says this in Psalm 118. This is the day, this day, right now, not tomorrow. This is the day the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad in what? In it. Now, if I could do that alone, if I could let that shape my soul, it would transform the way that I begin to live out and live into a heart that's grateful and lives with that amazing sense. And yes, life is full of losses, and many of us have go through great hardships, things that we have lost perhaps along the way in life, people that we have lost along the way in life. But a lot of us have found that right in the midst of even the losses of life, the reason we feel the loss is because we had a blessing. When my parents passed away, I realized how deeply the level of loss was related to the level of blessing. And even people I know here who may feel like I've lost a parent or a loved one, and they maybe weren't always the greatest parent that they would have hoped for, but they begin to realize they did some things for them. They made some sacrifices, pretty amazing ones, actually. They might have done a lot of things wrong, but they did some things very sacrificially to have tried to make something possible. Or we've lost something in the way of financial blessings, but it makes us realize we had those blessings. Or many other things along the way of life. Like even in losses, we can start to say, wow, the reason I feel that way is because there was something to lose in the first place. So in the midst of everything, there is this ability to be amazed. And so I want to ask you to ponder with me these questions. One, what do you see around you? What do you just imagine, these are not questions to answer right now, but in your own mind to answer them. What do you see around you? What do you smell around you? What do you touch around you? What do your senses take in? There's a lot, and it's amazing. What about taste? It's amazing. It's a connection to what? To goodness. Taste is a connection to goodness. Smell, touch, sight, all of it is a connection to goodness. Secondly, what do you see in others? What do you see in others? What are their gifts? What do you see in others that is a gift in ways that their strengths, their joy, their quirkiness, all of it? And the connection that you have, and the sharedness of life that you have. That you have somebody that you can share things with. That is a gift. And lastly, what do you see in you? What are you grateful for about you? Some of us might be struck and say, oh, well, that's kind of selfish to think about that. It's not. If you're not grateful for yourself and for the strengths, the gifts, the good elements of your own heart, then you're missing something. It's the psalmist himself who wrote, "O Lord, I thank you essentially that I am what? Fearfully and wonderfully made." The psalmist said, I'm wonderfully made. Do you realize that you are wonderfully made? And if you despise yourself, you will never be a grateful person because you are part of the gift. Your existence, as some have said, is the very first gift to yourself. Your existence. It's a good starting place to be grateful. And lastly, it comes to saying thanks. Say thanks, realizing that everything good is a gift. It's a great thing to begin by just seeing the amazing things in life, but we need to realize and recognize that all of what is we call good, whatever you might name as good, is not just good, it's a gift. That's the transition we need to make. We're missing something, and when we say thanks, we make the connection between identifying something as merely good and realizing, no, it was given as a gift to me. So when we give thanks, what we're doing is we're connecting. Hey, I didn't just have good food. You shared your food with me. Thank you. I'm realizing it's not just a good plate of food. It was a gift given. That's the connection. And that's what we have and can bring up above all with God. Because every good and perfect thing comes from God. He is the ultimate source of everything. And that is why he is at the very core of what our gratefulness is really about. Let me make this really, really clear. There's so much goodness in your life and my life. You're not lucky. You're loved. And you better figure that out. There's nothing more tragic than people who think I'm just lucky. Now you are, and I am lucky. There's nothing I deserve to be born in this time or this place or what have you. But we need to understand something. We're not just lucky. We're loved. And that is the connection we make when we are able to live gratefully and say thank you for those things. And it's the connection we see Jesus living into. Jesus had very little. He came and he's born into poverty. He is born as one who becomes a refugee fleeing to Egypt. He's one whose whole reputation would be confronted. All the powers of this world would come against him. He lost his father when he was very young. Jesus was not living in this world with any grand blessings that we might think of. All the things that we might think one would be blessed by, their power, their royalty, their wealth. No. And yet he lived out of this incredibly deep connection to the Father. Everything that he experienced here, he knew where it came from. So when he was given one small meal and there's a whole crowd to feed, you may recall what he did. He took the little bit of food he had, and what did he do? He lifted it up and gave thanks. And that's what he invites us to do, to take whatever it is, however little, and give thanks and watch what happens when we do. And that's what we have an opportunity now to do. We're just going to take a little time to kind of open up, a little open mic time as we've made a tradition of doing. And we're taking our little things, not always little, but they might seem little, and we're lifting them up and we're saying thanks. So with that, I'm going to invite us to do that. And Marlo has a microphone back here, and she will come. And what I want to invite you to do, if you feel so led and you feel so a little braveness there, I want to invite you to just in a moment raise your hand. Marla will come by with the mic. I'm going to ask if you would stand and kind of turn towards the majority of the room, wherever you're sitting, and just share what you're thankful for. But I want to encourage us to start with, I'm thankful to God for. We tend to sometimes think of this as a time to maybe be thankful for family and spouses. I want to encourage us that's fine. It would be really healthy sometimes not to merely thank others for the person sitting next to us or for family, as appropriate as that may be, but to really want to make sure that we're saying, thank you, God. Thank you, God, ultimately, for so-and-so. And to do it as briefly as possible. For some, I know that there's a really long story involved. So that's hard. It's hard to share certain things because it takes a whole story to make it clear. But I'm going to ask you to try to be brief and get to the point of that if you can, or maybe as simple as I'm thankful for the air I breathe. Instead of wiping down the microphone to be safe and healthy here, we're just going to say, keep your mask on as you share it. That way we won't have to deal with cleaning that up. So with that, I invite us to share.
Good morning, everyone. I just want to thank God because